Well, hello and welcome to another edition of Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, where Team Needham discusses everything healthcare. I'm your host, Shawn Needham, along with my wonderful wife, Janet, and we are super excited to have Elizabeth Katzman on our podcast today. She is going to be talking about the pill hangover. And for those of you that follow Janet and I, you know that we specialize in hormone replacement, and you know that we would never, ever recommend someone take hormonal birth control because we see the damage it does to women's bodies. So Elizabeth is going to be talking to us about how to fix some of that damage after you go off them. So Elizabeth, welcome to our show.
Hi, Shawn. Hi, Janet. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you got here.
I was a lawyer before having children, and then I have four children. I had two at the time, and they were having ear infections, and they kept being given antibiotics, and it just seemed nuts. So I did some research, decided to stop giving them dairy. They never got an ear infection, and I thought, wow, I need to get educated in order to take care of my family. So I went back to school for nutrition, health coaching, and then as I entered in perimenopause, I went back to A4M and did some mentorships and started getting into perimenopause, menopause, HRT, and all of that, which was a whole nother thing because, I had been in the space of health and wellness, focusing on gut health, liver, and that sort of thing for many years. And then when perimenopause hit me, I was not prepared. And all of my clients were roughly the same age. So everyone was in the same boat. And it's been a few years now. And so I'm in a good place, but it required a lot of education. So, yeah. And one of the things I find prescribed is the pill in perimenopause, which is just the most insane thing. And so I'm working with women who are in their 40s and 50s who are on the pill. And also they have teenagers and daughters in their 20s who are on the pill. So it spans across a tremendous long period of time that people are being given this.
Wow. That's quite a story. So first of all, thank you for recovering from being an attorney.
Yeah, yeah, I'm a recovering attorney.
That was a joke. I often say that, I don't like attorneys, but my best friend is an attorney, and we have a very good attorney. So I know you being a former attorney, you understand the attorney jokes.
Of course, of course. Um, yeah, it has helped me though with research, and I did do some medical malpractice, and so that helped a lot. Just trying to get to the bottom of things and how to read research and come to your own, independent conclusions has been
Oh,
helpful.
for sure. I'm sure it did. So Janet has very strong opinions on the birth control pill. So I bet she has some comments and some questions.
I do. So I like to equate putting women on the birth control as being a chemical menopause because it really shuts down their ovaries. And to me, it's frightening that so many women have been on a product for so long, especially like for my generation. We started in our 20s and now we're menopausal. So, you know, it's sad the havoc that we have reaped on women. And usually when you talk to prescribers, they have the same feeling that Shawn and I used to have is that, oh, it's safe and effective. I mean, in risk benefit ratio, but I'm interested in some of the stories that you might have with women and some of the things that you're seeing because the safe and effective thing just lost me a long time ago with what was happening to women. So if you could share just a few stories along the way about what women are really going through when they have been on the pill for so many years.
Well, first of all, it goes back to informed consent. So people think it's fairly benign just because it's common. So when they see their physician and they say, yeah, there's largely no side effects, maybe a little bit of weight gain. We can sort of adjust, but no big deal. And everyone knows girlfriends who are on the pill, and it just sort of seems natural. So you take their word for it, sure. And I don't think it's nefarious. I just think there's a lack of education because a lot of physicians, as you know, are being educated by the pharmaceutical rep and really not diving in any deeper. So they do believe what they're saying. And a lot of women who are afraid of HRT, they think that bioidentical hormone replacement is somehow scary, and they think somehow that the pill's not, when really it's obviously backwards there. So they think that they're doing something that's really not that big of a deal. The doctor thinks they're doing their client, their patients a favor. Let's say you have in my case, I was a 16-year-old girl who was not sexually active and actually had a regular cycle. And my doctor said, let's get you on the pill. It just helps everything stay regular. And what did I know? I knew nothing. I said, sure, I'll take it. When I decided to get off of it in my early 20s, I had been on a antidepressant because being on the pill does affect, your gut brain connection. It causes leaky gut, which of course, if you have any sort of gut issues, does lead to higher rates of depression. So many women like myself find themselves progressing from being on birth control to an antidepressant. That's a very common trajectory. Both of those things impact our bone health. So this is, at a time of life when we're trying to establish proper bone density before the age of 30, and you're already on 2 pharmaceuticals that negatively impact that. I work with a number of women whose daughters have been put on the pill, some of them who I've been able to jump in between and stop it from happening, but because they have acne. So yes, it's going to help suppress your oil glands, but also when you get off of the pill, a lot of women then feel the acne come back even more intensely. Everything is just that much more amped up because it's been suppressed for a long time. And what people don't realize is, of course, we all love our children and we want everything to go as seamlessly as possible. But when you're entering into puberty, it takes a few years for your body to figure out what's going on, right? We need our brain and our ovaries and pituitary. We need everything to communicate with each other and learn how to communicate. And so the worst thing you can do is block that communication in those early years in the teens, and really it can take even into early 20s for proper communication. So yeah, a lot of women also have endometriosis where they're being told that the pill is going to help that. And it's really just sort of pausing the problem until later, which again can be exacerbated when they get off of the pill. It's really not solving anything. It's just delaying issues that you are then eventually going to have to deal with.
Yeah, it's literally just like in endometriosis. It's masking the problem. I
Mhm.
mean, and a lot of times it'll even make it worse in the long run, just because of its suppressing your own natural progesterone production, which, endometriosis is usually a progesterone deficiency. And then you give a birth control pill and it makes it worse.
Well, and what happens a lot is a lot of women then in perimenopause, menopause decide this is the time they're going to get off of the birth control, where they're already not ovulating or not ovulating consistently. So they're not getting their own natural progesterone and their estrogen is fluctuating. And so that then gives endometriosis a real chance to kick in. It's, also an issue where, I know women who are physicians themselves, highly educated, thoughtful, and they are taking birth control and they think it's a form of HRT. And I've had to have a lot of long conversations with them. So I always want to make sure that people know I'm not coming from a place of putting down physicians at all. Because I think there's just a tremendous lack of education, because unless, a doctor is going back to a functional institute or some kind of other certification, there really isn't a lot of training about hormones. And the pill has been in our society for so long now, and everyone just sort of takes for granted and just assumes that it's no big deal and it's making their life easier. I know a lot of my clients in perimenopause where I have to coach them to get off the pill because I have no idea what stage they're at. Are they early, late, fully menopausal? we don't know, because they still believe that they're getting a period, because a lot of women don't understand that that monthly bleed is just a withdrawal bleed. It's just to really make us think that things are normal. Because when you go back to the history of the pill at the time it came out, it really wasn't legal for there to be birth control. So it was put out into a world of, regulating a menstrual cycle.
Right.
So people were sort of brainwashed right from the get-go of thinking that was actually a menstrual cycle and we were regulating it, not that we were completely taking it away and taking over our endocrine system and then just giving women a withdrawal bleed to create the illusion of normalcy.
Exactly. And when we think of normalcy, if a woman is not having a regular cycle and she's in her childbearing years, in her teens and 20s and even 30s, if she's not having a regular cycle, fix the problem. Don't treat it with birth control thinking that that's fixing the problem. It's really, like you say, just prolonging the problem.
Yeah, and I think that we need to start educating our young women early on what causes these issues. So my 4 kids range from ages from 10 to 18. And I love when the teenage girls come over and I can sit down and talk to them about this, because they're eager for the information. I think we completely underestimate what our young women are capable of and willing to do for their own health. When I explain to them that eating ultra processed foods and going to Starbucks and grabbing a muffin on their way to school and snacking on candy bars, when I explain how that impacts their hormones, their menstrual cycle, how it can help their cramping and their discomfort and their acne and all this, when I explain how that works, they're like, oh, why? Yeah, why would I eat that? No problem. I can start my day with eggs. I can, really focus on it's not that big of a deal. Just nobody's explaining these things to them. And so then when a client comes across my table at, they're 45 years old, but they still don't know this because no one's ever discussed it with them. We could have caught it in their teens and they could have lived a much more enjoyable life. I think there's a real, I don't know, people don't, and I understand, of course, people don't want to be uncomfortable, but as we've said, you're just delaying it. So just put in the work in the beginning, develop good habits. And as far as, a good percentage of women who are on contraception, like myself when I was a teenager, aren't even on it for contraception. They're on it for a variety of other reasons. And if contraception is really the issue at hand, well, then let's look at our options. These days, there's so many cool tools out right now. There's Mira and Uva, there's devices that you can just pee on a couple days a month. There's only a couple days of a month that's our window that we're concerned about. And the devices now can tell you when your LH is surging. So it catches it before even ovulation. You can be, on top of things. And again, it's underestimating what women are able and capable of. It's not that confusing. It's not that hard. Someone just needs to take a minute and be told, or be curious enough themselves to find that education. But most women really don't understand how their cycles work. And as educated as I was, I definitely wasn't prepared for it. I didn't, my cycles were getting shorter. I was experiencing a little anxiety. So, perimenopause definitely was confusing until I had to go back to school again and get educated. And of course, we know during perimenopause, there's a huge increase in thyroid issues, and women who have been on the pill have almost a 300% increase in incidence of hypothyroidism, because it inhibits the enzyme that converts T4 to your active T3. As well as leaky gut, as well as it depletes iodine and selenium and your methylated B vitamins. It affects methylation. So there's just so many reasons why it affects your thyroid, which is another reason I can't stand it for women in perimenopause, because when you're losing your progesterone, that's already increasing your risk of having thyroid issues, and you're just making things worse.
Yeah, for sure. Janet, you have some comments?
Yeah, I do. I feel like, and I'm saying this from the perspective of, the first few years of nursing, pharmacy, and physicians, MDs. We pretty much sit in the same space, in the same classes. So the core work that we start before we differentiate out into our professions, we're together for quite some time, and then we differentiate out. I feel like that should be where we are really hitting in our schools and education, the building blocks of health. And I just feel like that is totally missed. So, yes, it's not necessarily everybody's fault. However, we are required as professionals to fill in the gaps where we need to. And I think we really need to hit that hard, because nutrition is really the building block of our health. And you touched on that with younger women. And rarely, when I speak to women, do I ever hear that a provider has asked them about their diet. Rarely.
Oh,
And,
never.
right? And then we start talking about, some of the things that you mentioned. Well, we do know that estrogen depletes the body of B vitamins. We do know that we need more protein in our diet. I mean, there's so many things. But what we get kind of told in our space is, the insurance driven model does not give our providers the time to educate their patients. So, how do we change that? What's your opinion on that? Because I feel like the only way we're going to get medicine back in the right realm is if people push back somehow. So, how do we get to the space where we actually are teaching our clients and patients again where they should be to be healthy?
Yeah, because women, well, and also who are you going to, which practitioner? So I think a lot of women are confused and think that their OBGYN is the place to go for hormones. And it is logical. One would assume if they're an OB that they would be trained in hormones, and yet they are not. And that tends to be who a woman sees the most. And they think that the woman who or the woman or man, the practitioner who delivered their baby is going to be the one that is going to help them potentially with HRT when they're in perimenopause. And the reality is that OBs are almost never trained in hormones. And most women can't afford to go outside the insurance model. So seeing a more functional practitioner where you're doing a cash pay is not accessible to everyone. But I do know traditional doctors who are under the insurance model who do take the time. And I think women have to understand that doctors work for us, we pay them. And I think a lot of women think it's the other way around. It's one of the reasons I feel like women won't be forthcoming 100% with their physician, because they're embarrassed, or they feel like it's white coat syndrome. They feel like the doctor is somehow up here and they're down here, and they need to say the right things and present themselves. Women can be such pleasers, and they don't want to be a bother, and they don't want to get, take up anyone's time. So I think it's up to a woman to really demand a conversation and to say, hey, like, I would like to know. I'm confused. And it goes back to the whole informed consent thing. You are owed a certain amount of time, a conversation. And if you are with a doctor who's very dismissive, then it's time to find someone else, because there are a lot of good practitioners. But as a consumer, because we are the consumer and we are paying them, and it's important to keep in mind. And just because you loved a doctor at one point in your life, they delivered your babies, they were the greatest. Okay, that's great. Maybe they're great at that, but maybe this isn't what they're great at now. I think we need to be open to changing practitioners or adding more onto our team if you don't want to completely, break off ties with whoever's doing your pap smears and that sort of thing. But I do think it has to come from the woman expecting and demanding more.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, if we're going to fix healthcare, it's not going to be really from the from the top down. I think it needs to be from the bottom up. And consumers need to drive it just like they drive any other market. And I think ultimately, as healthcare practitioners, we need to be the ones to educate and empower them to drive the market. Because ultimately they don't they don't always know what to expect. So I think education and empowering them to take charge of their own health is the most important thing that we can do.
Yeah, I mean, luckily, I think we're living in a time where these conversations are happening so much more, and people aren't just taking their doctor's word for it anymore, which I think is incredible. I do see less and less women in their teens, especially the women in their 20s, really don't want to be on birth control. That group of women is becoming really educated. And I'm really finding it more in my age group. I'm 51, and I feel like I'm in an age group of women that almost everybody took the pill, whether it was for contraception or not. It
Yeah.
was just given. And I think that in my age group, it's particularly difficult for women to understand that the pill is actually something that's not going to be doing them any favors. And it also happens to be the same group of women who were raised on low fat foods and have a really difficult time wrapping their minds around healthy fats and enough protein. It's a group that's still really obsessed with being skinny. Um, you know, it's just for whatever reason, my age group it really likes an easy fix more than I'm seeing women in their 20s. When this group of women now coming up, I think, is really wanting to take ownership of their health and do the work. So,
Well,
but
I think
yeah,
well, we're basically the same generation that you grew up, and if you think about it, you know, women in their 20s, they've seen a generation of half of people, and it's obvious what we've been doing in America for the last 30, 35 years, what you and I grew up with about, low fat diets, high carb diets, red meat's bad for you, eggs are bad for you, cholesterol is bad for you. Obviously, those things, birth control pills are good for every woman. Obviously, those things are not working for our health. Americans have some of the worst health we've ever had, ever. I mean, our longevity has actually decreased over the last decade or so because our health is so bad. Cardiovascular disease kills an American every 1.8 seconds. So I think, the younger generation is seeing that, and it's like they've got to do something different.
yes. And I think it can also be so confusing for women what role hormones play in our heart health. It's one of the easiest markers to look for. You hear all the time, and I can't stand it. These more traditional HRT women in this space right now who have large platforms on social media. I think people they just assume if a doctor's talking about HRT that they must be more functional, which isn't the case.
Right.
We
Which
know
which
exactly who you're talking. We know exactly who you're talking about. And I will say, she's blocked me on social media
because you
because
were
I was asking
commenting
her, huh?
because you were commenting on her.
Yeah,
Yes.
I was just asking her basic questions because her knowledge about hormones is she's ignorant about them, and she still believes for what is it for PCOS?
PCOS, let's treat them with Mirena IUD.
Exactly. That's
Right.
exactly what makes me
Which,
insane.
right. So the definition of what healthy, normal, identical hormones is totally lost out there. I mean, there's such a group of, and it's kind of scary because when you get time on Oprah, the
Yes.
world starts listening. And then, when we start hearing what they're saying, we're like, oh no, oh
Blown
no.
away.
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
she thinks, bioidentical is a marketing term. It's
Yeah.
it's a
Right.
She
it's
does.
yeah,
And
it's
and
molecularly different.
yeah. And just a lot of bad information. She she only believes in FDA approved products, yet she sells supplements. So,
100%.
yeah.
And
So
I've had clients come to me on IUDs and they've listened to her and they say, well, she said it's safe. And really, what are my credentials? I mean, I'm not a physician and she is. So at the end of the day, a lot of people are still in that mindset. I can guarantee you I've had many more hours of training in hormones than she has. But unless someone understands the difference in the paradigm, they're going to go with what an MD is saying, and they're going to believe it, and they're not going to understand that they are missing out on natural progesterone and all of the amazing things that it does for you.
possibly, although that's why, Elizabeth, these conversations are important, so we can let people know that, if somebody gets up there, and because we went to one of her presentations a few weeks ago, if somebody gets up there and the first thing they say is that they're double board certified, and this is basically why you should listen to them, that's probably why you shouldn't listen to them. If they want to brag about their credentials before they actually talk to you about your individual health, then I don't think they're worth listening to.
Well, and it fits into her model and others like it where they say, don't even bother checking hormone levels because it's the zone of chaos and everyone just believes it. Well, I mean, of course, hormones at any stage in our lives are not going to be right on the money every time. You could check it in the morning and it's different in the afternoon and the whole thing.
Right.
And that's the way hormones are. We know that. Is it a little bit more challenging in perimenopause? Sure, but that doesn't mean you can't test it. And to put someone on HRT of any form and then not retest and look just to say it's because it's too confusing and not reliable is ridiculous. And I guess that's what brings me back to what I was saying about lipid markers. Like there's so many markers you can look at as your estrogen declines, your lipids are going up. You can look at your FSH. You can look at trends. Are things going, if you check every couple months, are things going up? Are they going down? It doesn't have to be perfect every time. But this idea of, because these larger platforms that have so much venture capital money behind them, it doesn't fit in their model to take a look at the individual and to recheck. It's like, oh, okay, we just base it on symptoms. You've checked these boxes, you have the symptoms. Here's your low dose patch. And here's, even if it's bioidentical progesterone, okay, I mean, yay, I guess it's better than nothing. But the reality is, the sad part, most women, what they're being given by these larger platforms or doctors like that is going to be enough to suppress symptoms. And so they're going to immediately feel better and think that they have this great functional approach and I'm on top of things and I've got HRT. Well, guess what? 5 years later, you've got osteoporosis because
Yes.
you're not on enough estrogen. You're on the lowest dose patch, which was
Right.
just enough to take away your hot flashes. It wasn't enough to protect your bones.
Well, and one of the biggest telltale signs that somebody doesn't know what they're talking about, and this is traditional with a lot of OBGYNs because how they're taught is that, and we're talking about this big influencer. She says the same, if you've had a hysterectomy, you don't need progesterone. That is the biggest red flag that they don't know what they're talking about. As if progesterone only works in the uterus. That is ignorance.
Because your poor brain and your poor bones. And, what women struggle with the most is anxiety and depression at this time. And how, and then they think that progesterone is just, maybe to help you fall asleep, but it's just so much more than that.
Right.
And what I see with the birth control pill is that women who were on it the longest, they tend to have this progesterone intolerance. So it's usually when a woman is okay, they're on board now, they understand how things work. Yes, I'm willing to get on HRT, and they take progesterone and they feel badly on it. It's more excitatory. It's working on different neurotransmitters. Their receptor function has been messed up because of the pill, because of synthetic progestins. And now the receptors don't know how to dock a natural bioidentical progesterone. So a lot of those women then will do better topically or a vaginal progesterone. So a lot of them, you can get around it by just not giving them oral progesterone. And again, there's not a lot of studies on topical progesterone and how if it, adequately protects the uterus. We can only kind of guess if it does or not. So I kind of like to pair it if someone can't tolerate oral progesterone because perhaps they were on the pill too long and it blocked the receptors. I like to combine a topical. Usually I'll have them apply it on the breast and then do a vaginal progesterone for the uterus just to make sure it's getting directly to the source. And I have heard practitioners say that if it's not orally, it doesn't have that effect on allopregnenolone, and they're not going to be, in the GABA receptors, they're not going to feel as relaxed and sleepy or whatever. I personally haven't found that with myself, and I haven't found it with clients. I find that doing that at nighttime is still very relaxing and leads to a good night's rest.
Well, there's a big fallacy out there when it comes to all hormone replacement, whether it be estrogen or whether it be progesterone. And, if you put it on topically, it bypasses the liver and, or if you take it orally, it goes into the liver. And it does. That's true. But any hormone that's lipophilic, which all the estrogens, progesterone, testosterone, they have a cholesterol backbone. They're lipophilic. Eventually, they're going to reach the liver. So
Yeah.
no matter how it gets into your blood, topically, IV, sublingual, orally, it's going to go into the liver. It's not going to bypass the liver because it is fat soluble. It's going to get in the liver. So there's a lot of misinformation about that, floating around. And, that's just like you said, topical is going to end up in the liver and have the same effect, maybe not quite as fast, and maybe not to as much extent because it goes through the liver first when you swallow it, but it's still going to end up in the liver.
But I
Yeah.
think you touched on a point that's very important for women to understand, and even prescribers. We all react differently. You have 10 women in the room, you need to have different doses for each person. Maybe what we are dealing with would be osteoporosis, or maybe it's calming them, or maybe they're sensitive, so you need to take it slower. Or like I have a few clients that, man, they eat their hormones up to amount and they're not holding on to them. Like they don't have remains of hormones sitting in your body. So to remember that we are not all the same and that our needs change over time and adjustments need to be looked at, and to get back to where we were with the topic of the influencers out there, one size does not fit all with hormones. We weren't made that way. And so we need to realize that this is a dynamic process, and that we do need to have the exchange between our providers and ourselves as time goes on. So those tests are important. It's important to measure how our bones are doing or how our anxiety is doing. So our symptoms go along with our labs, along with the results that we have, and looking at us as a whole. Because I think the sad part about maybe it's Western medicine or it's just our time frame that we're living in is that we want we do want that quick fix, but we want to put everybody in the same box, and we're not.
Yeah, and I think also that women need to sort of temper their expectations of HRT. Just like you were saying, things change. So if a woman starts on it, it really requires monitoring and how they feel, because if they're starting it in mid to late perimenopause, things are going to be changing relatively quickly, and you need to stay on top of it, and you need to be open to changing your dosage or maybe the route of administration. So it does require some work. So it can be work to get a woman to accept that they would benefit from HRT. And then once you get over that hurdle, they have to also understand it's not a magic bullet, and you have to do all of the things and you have to really be paying attention. And the route of administration is important. It's one of the reasons I don't like the pill during perimenopause too, is because, we know that oral estrogen raises your inflammatory markers, which are already raising during perimenopause. We know that your risk of blood clots go up with age. So it's like the absolute opposite time of when I would ever want to give a woman oral estrogen, and the risk of clots, it's low, but I know women who have had strokes in their 20s from it. So it's not a zero risk. It does absolutely happen. So,
Well, let's remember that all estrogen are not created equal.
yeah,
Ethinyl estradiol, which is in birth control pills, is not bioidentical estradiol. Premarin,
right.
Conjugated equine estrogen is not bioidentical estradiol. So not all estrogens are created the same. So we need to remember that also.
Yeah, exactly. And it's part, the whole progesterone thing is part of why I call this the pill hangover, is because I really want women to understand that you may have stopped taking the pill in your 20s, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to have a progesterone intolerance in your, 40s and 50s. And also, you are set up for such a tremendous increased risk of hypothyroidism, which
Mhm.
already exists. You're also set up for a greater risk of osteoporosis.
Yep.
Yes, I agree.
More clients than not that I send to go get a DEXA scan, or I like REMS echo light a little bit more. But most women come back in the osteopenia range,
Mhm.
and you're not told to get a DEXA until 65, until your insurance covers it, and that by that time, like, the horse has left the barn. I mean, what do you
Exactly.
it would be nice to have a baseline when you're in your 20s, check it in your 30s, and then, check a little more. I like REMS Echo Light because it's a little less available, but even though DEXA is very little radiation, the Echo Light is an ultrasound. It's no radiation, and it actually tells you the quality of your bone. So a DEXA could say you're in the deep end of osteopenia, teetering maybe on osteoporosis, but you could go get a REMS echo light, and it can tell you, actually, though, the quality of your bone is really great, and you only have a 5% risk of a fracture. But for women with a history of birth control and or antidepressants, the
Mhm.
earlier the better, because those women need to be thinking a little bit earlier. They really need to stay on top of if they're going to decide to do HRT or not. And if they see the wrong practitioner and they're given the pill instead, well, then, wow, they're really in trouble.
And let's remember, kind of like what you were alluding to, just because a DEXA scan says that you have good bone density, doesn't mean you have good, strong bones. DEXA scans are notorious for, checking a T-score, and the drugs that traditionally are prescribed, the biphosphonates, the Prolia and Forteo, they will make bones more dense, but not necessarily stronger. The only thing that really makes bones stronger is bioidentical hormone replacement, and especially testosterone.
Right. Or they'll make them stronger, but fragile,
Yeah, right,
brittle.
exactly.
So they're
Brittle bone.
they're
Right,
they're
exactly.
dense, but they have no flexibility. So
Eh,
you just,
Right,
you land wrong and snap.
yeah. Which you could argue, it's like, are the bones stronger if they're more brittle? I would say no.
No,
You
I
know,
would not want that.
Right. No, I wouldn't either. So, as we wrap this podcast up, we're running out of time. Elizabeth, we're going to stream your website here, and let us know if anybody has any questions. What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Um, on my website, there's at strongchoices.com. They can contact me, and they can also, I check my Instagram at strongchoices1. A lot of people DM me, and I get back to them that way. So it's pretty easy to reach me through my website or through Instagram.
Awesome. Last question. What do you have a passion for, Elizabeth?
I have a passion for helping. All my clients are my age, and I'm passionate about them, but I love helping their kids, because I love helping that teen to 20 group and really getting them off to a strong start. That just lights me up.
That is really rewarding. So, thank you for being on our show today. You'd help us realize our goal, which is to educate and empower individuals to take charge of their own health. So, thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Shawn. Thanks, Janet.
You're welcome.
And thank you, listeners and viewers, for tuning in to Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. Tune in Thursday to our midweek podcast, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thank you.